Yo guys, this is a video about RTS games and quality of life changes. Quality of life changes that help streamline the game and make certain parts of an RTS more easy, but at the same time you might lose a small element of skill expression in doing certain tasks and applying your APM in certain areas of an RTS. What is the best for hardcore players and what is the best for casual players? And the reason I'm talking about this is all because of a recent change in the Age of Empires 2 scene, where certain parts of creating farms has been streamlined and made a little bit more easily. Let's talk about it. You see, Age of Empires 2 just had an improvement in how you can place farms, and everybody's talking about it. Here's a video from Spirit of the Law that talks about AoE 2's audification and auto farm placement. And here's a video from the Viper with the Viper talking about T90, talking about farms, and now I'm talking about it. So I think there's a title there that gets even longer. So what's this all about? Well, basically, Age of Empires 2 developers have added an auto farm placement around the mill, copying a functionality that Age of Empires 4 released with. The games were released 22 years apart. Instead of manually choosing the location of all farms, you can now place optimally placed farms around the mill by holding Shift and hovering over the mill and then issuing left-click commands. This is an improvement of the streamlining of making farms in an RTS game, and I have a lot to talk about it, and it somehow correlates to changes that did happen in Warcraft 3 and could happen in Warcraft 3 still, and whether these kind of changes are a good thing, because it is undeniable that there is a skill expression in quickly placing farms in optimal locations. But first, let's take a look at Spirit of the Law's video about how it looks like in Age of Empires 2.
The change is that if you have a mill built or have a foundation, you can hold Shift when placing farms and clicking on the mill, where the game will now automatically place them in ideal spots. It's a nice little feature that Age of Empires 4 has had since release, and should lead to more efficient and faster to place farms in the late game, speeding up a repetitive task. One thing to keep in mind is that the actual farming rate benefit to this is probably smaller than you expect if you have the tech handcart. Farms are capped in how quickly they can generate food, and with
So basically, if you were to try and do a job of very chaotically and sloppily placing farms, this is something like what it might look like. Whereas if you use the auto-place farming location, you can just hold your cursor over the middle of the mill, and it will automatically start placing them in the optimal, most tight location near the mill. Now, Spirit of the Law calls this a repetitive task, and I think that part is objectively true, though some people will describe it as, let's say, an interesting skill expression of managing your base, building up your base, and actually kind of, even though it is a repetitive task, not a tedious or monotonous task, because it feels fun and satisfying to build up your base. Whereas other players feel more indifferent towards the fun of such an activity, and they're simply doing it to have a means to an end, aka to spend lumber in order to make farms and then to get food from it in order to streamline your economy and boost your food income in Age of Empires 2. So whether you like it or not, you at least can agree that it is objectively a repetitive task. Some people in life like repetitive tasks, and other people prefer to focus more on other things. So how many and which quality of life changes should generally be added to older games, one may wonder? And how many quality of life features should new games release with? So normally I would say you should add any and all changes that help the casual player to achieve more comfort and happiness. In my opinion, even pros and content creators rely on a really big casual base, and developers obviously rely on a big casual base because it means they sell more copies and more future content. And developers, of course, also take benefit from having creators be active in their scene. Casual players generally feel more served by fun and comfortable games rather than difficult and tedious and laborious games and stressful. However, RTS games aren't exactly your average genre. If you were to take any of 3 really popular games out there in the strategy or turn-based genre, if you mashed all of those together, those games, you would roughly get an RTS. RTS generally has a skill set that comprises multiple different core hobbies. And those core hobbies, in my opinion, are worker optimization, base building management and unit training, unit control, minimap awareness and reacting to trends, difficult strategy choices and tactical decisions, and base, defense, and attacking their base and defending your own. If you were to split an RTS into these 6 categories, I believe you would cover most of it. So you get to this really interesting situation where you have new RTSs that are coming out in 2024, such as Stormgate or Zero Space or Tempest Rising, and then you look at them and you wonder how much attribution towards any of these skills are they coming out with? How are they trying to crack the code of making an RTS that is accessible to the casual player while still satisfying to the hardcore player? And the interesting thing is when you have a new game coming out, you judge it by itself with what it offers at the time of it coming out. Whereas when you have an older game that's been successful and popular for a very long time, every time you make a change, it creates more of a shockwave through the community where every little change is being discussed and whether it's a good or a bad thing. In the Viper talking about T90 video, you will notice that T90 feels like it is not a good thing that auto farm placement is coming to the game of Age of Empires 2. Though, of course, that is his opinion right now. It might still change. I'm not saying it's going to be like that forever. But basically, he alleges that concerns about auto farming include that auto farm allocation removes a crucial skill which is right now an integral part of category 2 of the skill, which is base building. Players that already excel in that skill are going to have their training that they've been doing over the last 20 plus years diminished, whereas players that favor micro gain an unfair advantage because now they don't need to spend as much time building farms one by one. They can instead hover over the mill and auto place them all. Additionally, adding auto farming to Age of Empires 2, well, it's never been part of the game so far, and the game has been so popular until now, there must be a reason for it, isn't there? Why add it now? Why change the successful formula? It's another thing that T90 brings up in the video. And the third point that I got from his video is everyone's base is going to be looking more homogeneous. Before, when casting and observing pro games, you could tell who was a meticulous base builder and who was a more sloppy base builder. Now, more and more, everyone is going to have a more streamlined looking base and farming setup, which leads to more optimized farming and also leads to less character definition per player and more optimization. And above all of it, you know that it didn't require as much skill to be fast at placing down all those farms. Now, I totally get these points, and I even agree with them in some way. But it's complicated, right? Because I see it from both sides. I think this part makes sense. But first, let's see what is in favor of auto farming. It's going to make things easier for all players, high and low skill level. It's pleasant to use, it's convenient, and it streamlines part of the game. A part of the game that some people maybe enjoy, and for some people it's merely a necessity, and for other people they may not super enjoy that part and they want to focus on something else. Because we all play games for various reasons. I really like worker optimization and splitting between resources in RTS games. And some of the new RTSs that are coming out, they have no worker optimization at all. Godsorn and Zero Space have pretty simple worker optimization, and I miss having fun with that. But in their philosophy, they're saying, well, this worker optimization part, it's too difficult for casual players, so let's remove that barrier of entry and let people focus on others. And as much as I like number one skill attribution, I will say anytime you lessen any of these and you lessen the skill expression in any of these, naturally, because we're playing competitive multiplayer games, assuming that we play multiplayer, because many people don't play multiplayer. And if you play single player, I think quality of life is 100% a plus. But in multiplayer, whenever you make something easier and you lessen any of these 6 skills, naturally, it's going to balance out that one of the other skills will be more pronounced. There is almost no game in the world in multiplayer that is easy because you're playing against other people that are playing the same game. So if it's easy for you, it's easy for them, which means that the skill expression and the competition will come down to really small things that are simple but can be done slightly better by one player than by the other. So Let's say if, for instance, if you canceled worker optimization, workers automatically produce and they automatically mine. Some RTSs have this, and while I'm not a fan of it, I can say now that I no longer need to think about this 10% of the time, I'm thinking about these 100% of the time. Alright, so maybe there's no base building management and unit training either. Maybe all of that is automatic, or at the very least, much easier. Well, now I'm gonna have more time for unit control, battles and skirmishes, saving workers and micromanaging. I'm gonna have more chance to look at the minimap to see enemy movement and to look at the enemy base to see their base building and to see their strategy decisions through their buildings and then making my own decisions. Whereas in StarCraft 2, I may have very little time to think about strategy sometimes and what units I need to switch into because I'm just so busy defending the next wave of attack and dodging Widow Mine shots and etc. I don't get much time to think. Now, if you make the game turn-based and you remove the real-time part and you create a card game or a turn-based strategy game, suddenly you've got lots of time to think, which actually means that the quality of your strategy decisions goes up. So you see, it's not so much that removing a core skill expression through farm allocation, as T90 ends up arguing in the video, is a problem for skill expression or will diminish skill expression from players. It's just that it's gonna switch to something else. And I do get it. T90 is a great caster and he casts a lot for Age of Empires 2. And I love listening to his cast, and he casts high-level players and low-level players, and it's funny to see people with poor farm setups, and it's going to be a shame to lose that. It is a sacrifice of a kind of unique brand of the game, but I'm thinking perhaps it's worth it to sacrifice it at the altar of shifting skill expression somewhere else and to streamlining something to make the game just slightly less intimidating to pick up for someone that is interested but is scared off by certain quality of life things missing. And I'd say Age of Empires 2 and many other games aren't going far enough. Now, that's not to say that you can go so deep in quality of life streamlining that you should make everything automated. Obviously, there's going to be a limit somewhere in the automation process, because if you were to automatically have workers mine and split and start gathering resources and be produced, and you have units automatically produced, and the buildings are self-expanding and self-replicating, and it's like Factorio, but you're just watching and you don't have to do anything. And you know, if you get a really obvious warning anytime anything is sighted on the minimap, it basically removes too many different skills and it creates too much of an automated process, and before we know it, we're playing a game called AFK game and you're both just watching your simulation against theirs. So obviously I'm not saying that we should go everywhere and we should have every quality of life change implemented until there's nothing left to be done yourself. But even the farm change isn't you not doing anything anymore. You're still deciding how many farms you make, at which time, and the only part that is being removed is a couple of clicks and exactly the chance to make a couple of mistakes with it with placement around the mill. And again, I do get it. I like that part of the game as well, being efficient and placing it close. And now everyone can do it. A skill is lost that was built up. But I also think it's important to try and see what part of our resistance to new quality of life changes in RTS games is due to it becoming a worse skill expression game at the high level, and what part is just resisting change for the sake of change. Because you see, I've done this as well in Warcraft 3. In order to try and see if we are resisting change due to nostalgia, we can do a thought experiment where we try to do the opposite. We think of a state of the game as it is now, and we then think of removing a current quality of life feature, making something that is easy now more difficult. If we like it, because it adds extra skill expression, then we are not all about nostalgia. We actually like tedious mechanical games because there is a skill expression and there's a process that we enjoy. Let me name an example. Right now in Warcraft 3 or in Age of Empires 2, you can start a building with a worker, you can then hold shift, and then you can queue the command of that worker to go gather lumber right afterwards, gather wood. This is a quality of life feature that allows you to streamline your worker to have follow-up steps to go back to work after finishing a building. you could remove that. You could quality of life downgrade it, and now you will have to come back after a set period of time when the building finishes, creating a skill expression of remembering to multitask at the right time in the right location, to go back to your idle worker and then set it to work. If you support that direction of change, then you're not about nostalgia, because this is how it's always been possible, shift-clicking workers, but it would now no longer be possible. So you like that change because now it creates a skill expression of coming back to check on the worker. And you could go further. The idle worker, the idle villager box, where you can click a hotkey or you can click on the box in order to engage with idle workers so you can quickly put them to work, that could be removed as well, so that you're not even aware of when you have idle workers. And you need to physically go and find them yourself and then set them back to work. Well, that sounds horribly outdated, doesn't it? Do we really want those changes? Oh shit, there's already a game like that. StarCraft 1! StarCraft 1 already has no idle worker hotkey, and you need to come and check in on your workers every time they come out of your command center. They cannot be automatically rallied towards mineral fields, and it is now an integral skill expression in order to check up on all those workers. So that already exists. But is that the direction that StarCraft 1 should remain in? And is that the direction that new RTS or other RTS should go towards? Probably not. So I think it's all about finding the perfect quality of life balance while still preserving enough of the core identity and DNA of classical RTS games, making it continuing to be fun to play RTS games and to engage with the multitask of building up your base and engaging in strategy and battle micro. But let's remember that we also rely on the casual players, and let's also remember that anytime something is lessened, the other things are exacerbated. After all, if you no longer need to worry about farms as much, you have slightly more time to manage those archers, those spearmen, those knights, the grunts, the footmen, etc. So I think as well about some of the changes that Warcraft 3 players have had to learn to live with, and what is still lacking for us. So for instance, Warcraft 3 released without the ability to see enemy hero items. In Reign of Chaos, when you were playing the game, you would meet a Demon Hunter level 5, and you would then click on them, and the inventory box was completely grayed out. It was just like, let's say it was like the standard UI, the elaborate ornamental aesthetic that the Blizzard Warcraft 3 HUD has. It's beautiful. There will be like vines and stuff, and there'll be terrain, but you can't see their items. Where your own heroes have their 6 items, theirs would be blank. So you meet the demon level 5 and you don't know. Are you carrying healing potions? Are you carrying a potion of invulnerability? And you didn't know. So you start focus firing him and he's nearly dead. And then whoop, he gets 250 health or 300 health from a healing potion. Surely now he's gonna die. No, guess what? Healing potions didn't have a cooldown of drinking back then. So the next time they drop low, another heal pot, then another, and then an invulnerability potion. Not knowing how many potions he had was in essence also a knowledge check. You should know based on how much gold he could have, based on how big his army is, and based on the tendencies of players in general, how many healing potions he has. And I did know oftentimes. I knew to avoid focusing some heroes because I expected a certain amount of potions on them. This was a kind of knowledge skill expression for me, and I knew better than to focus heroes oftentimes, and instead I would go for units where I didn't have to suffer the RNG potentially, the uncertainty of what that unit was packing. I knew it's just a unit. And then in Frozen Throne, Blizzard added the ability to see enemy items. You know my first expression? That is so stupid. It has never been this way. It is going to be... I felt like being able to see the items on the enemy heroes was like watching television in my living room with the windows open, naked, with everyone walking by. I felt so watched, whereas before my items in my inventory on my heroes were secret. Now they could know. That doesn't make sense. You might as well remove the fog of war and just show all of our bases to each other. But that was an extreme overreaction, emotional reaction, because I didn't like the change. I already got used to how it was like to try and gauge what items someone could have, that I never stopped to wonder whether this would, in the long run, be a positive improvement. Would I now want to go back to the Reign of Chaos system? Would anyone now want to go back to the Reign of Chaos system? Well, probably a couple of people, but I would argue the vast majority of players is happy for the quality of life improvement that brought. And the best thing is, Blizzard didn't ask anybody. They didn't survey anybody. They just believed in it and they followed it. And it looks like the Age of Empires 2 developers are feeling the same way about the farm change. I don't think they asked anybody. They brought over the change, and despite resistance, most likely they're going to be keeping that change in the game. So now the best path for a pro player is adaptation. Adaptation and acceptance, because it's probably not going to go back. You see, I feel like the cat is out of the bag now. Now that casual players know that this can technologically be done in Age of Empires 2, they're probably not going to want to have their new toy being removed anymore. I used this system in Age of Empires 4 auto farm placement, and that's just how it was. I never questioned it. But I did feel like it was really convenient and fun to learn that this mechanic exists. I remember teaching other people about it in guide videos so that everyone could use it, and to remind them that this functionality exists. And people generally really like that change. I think it's being resisted because it had never been part of Age of Empires 2 yet. But I don't think the not having it was instrumental to the success of Age of Empires 2. I think Age of Empires 2 is successful because of a large swathe of different things, including their adherence to history, or at least in a soft way, right? The great voice acting and all the different languages and cultures that are being represented, the depth of strategy and different decisions that can be made, the micromanagement, even with all of its quirks, the extensive management of base building, base allocation, base placement, spacing, walling off, etc. So many different units. So I think it's a big combination of all of those, and ultimately I think there is no big drama going on in the AoE 2 scene, and while I do understand some resistance, I think generally this should be heralded as a positive change. There were other things too in Warcraft 3 that got improved over time. Warcraft 3 released without the ability to see mana bars in the main screen where you see all your units on the field, where your units are walking around. So nowadays I could have 6 shamans and a couple of wisps come in and they detonate on top of my shamans and I lose all of my mana. I would now see my health bar like this and my mana bar, zilch, nothing. You know what you had to do before? Click on Shaman 1, click on Shaman 2, click on Shaman 3, click on Shaman 4, click on Shaman 5, click on Shaman 6. You had to click. I taught myself to click all my own units. I taught myself to click all my own heroes. I taught myself to click the enemy heroes to check all their mana. Nowadays, there are mana bars under the health bar. It just makes sense actually. Because if you resist mana bars, which is a crucial basic info that every unit has, wouldn't you resist health bars too? Why should you ever see the health bars of any of the units on the screen? Because shouldn't that be a skill expression that you go click all the units to see which one is nearly dead? And you know what? By golly, Warcraft 3 was kind of like that as well. Because initially, we didn't have health bars available all the time. You had to press Alt in order to see the health of your units in Warcraft 3. We were playing like this. And that's me pressing the Alt hotkey. So while you're doing anything else, you're playing with your mouse, you're controlling your heroes, controlling your units, you're building things, and you go to the battle and you're controlling your Kodo Beast and your Raider, but then you're always doing this with your thumb, or you'd just be holding it while doing other things. That severely impacted everyone's ability to properly micro. Now you could look back at VODs of 2003 and think, well, we weren't as good as I thought we were. But keep in mind, we keep having to press Alt to see the health on all the units. Eventually, Blizzard added a functionality that says, always show health bars. And we stopped needing to buy new keyboards because our Alt key had been broken. You know what I thought about that at first? I didn't like it. I started playing with the new setting because it's a competitive advantage, but I had already learned to use Alt. Now when I pressed Alt, by muscle memory, it hid my health bars. Because when you have always health on and you press Alt, it removes it. So I'll be playing and I still have the metronome of my thumb doing this, and I'm literally hiding the health bars all the time. You see, I resisted all of these changes because I wasn't used to it, but now I feel like they're integral part of the game. You know what that probably means? There were more quality of life things that could have been done for Warcraft 3 that I never even thought about, that I would have hated initially, perhaps resisted. But back then, devs didn't listen to big Twitter drama and Reddit drama and then revert. And I still think you have to stand strong in your shoes nowadays, even with all those influences available. And if you are a strong, confident development team that has strong ideas about it, and most of all, good ideas, not bad ideas. We should still push back on bad ideas, right? But I think we should be honest with ourselves to see whether ideas that developers execute really are bad before maybe cooking up a stink. And I'm not saying T90 did that. I'm not saying anyone did that. There's a Reddit thread here that does talk about it, but I think everyone is being super reasonable about it. I think Age of Empires 2 generally has an extremely civilized and respectful community. But I am saying we should think about whether these changes that we initially feel like might not be a good idea are good or bad. In this Reddit thread, on the test server, the devs are testing automatically placing farms by clicking on the TC mill. I think it's a fantastic change, right? And then people talk about it. Hey, this was actually one of my key skills. It's one of the few things I excelled in, placing farms. But anyway, I'm not going to be salty about it. I'm happy for all my not well placing farm fellows, right? So it definitely is going to change a couple of things, but maybe you'll find something else that you're going to be good at. Warcraft 3 has more things that could be done, more quality of life changes that never happened, but might improve the game if it does happen. For instance, Warcraft 3 still does not have an in-game clock of real time to help players learn build order timings. Nowadays, I have 3 major timings. When I look at the very charming day-night cycle and the in-game clock that corresponds in some way to the time passage that has happened so far in the game. At 14:20, during the first day of the day-night cycle, you can start hiring a tavern hero from your altar as your first hero. 14:20. At 1800, nighttime starts and vision will be occluded, and creeps will go to sleep. At 1900, you can first buy Boots of Speed and Staff of Teleportation, and at 2300, the Goblin Shredder becomes available. So these are all really ephemeral in-game timings that don't have a clear correlation and do not tell a new player very easily about when things are going to be coming out. And while I do think it's charming and should stay, day-night cycle is a really cool, charming part of Warcraft 3, I no longer resist an in-game clock because it helps people learn the game better. That's been very helpful for me to learn Age of Empires 4 and StarCraft 2. And while I can't imagine needing it on my initial journey of Warcraft 3, it's only because it wasn't there to begin with. Nowadays, if I want to teach people via coaching and videos on YouTube and or Twitch, I would like to use an in-game clock that is readily available for everyone. But right now, the only services that offer it is if you use the W3 Booster add-on, and then you can choose to show a clock, or if you play ladder via the second place to play ladder, because you've got the original BattleNet server and then you've got the W3 Champion server, which is a very reputable and very popular and fun place to play Warcraft 3 as well. And that one, since a recent time, very recently, also offers an in-game clock for 1v1 games. And I think it's super helpful, it's hella helpful. But it is not yet being offered by Blizzard themselves, and I think it'd be a great thing to add, even though it lessens skill expression of being aware of the passage of time without such a clock. Additionally, Warcraft 3 still does not enable native hotkey changes for item hotkeys. So one of the primary ways of achieving this is using a Windows application, a third-party script called Auto Hotkey. Back in my day, it wasn't always allowed to use Auto Hotkey for items at tournaments. Some tournaments would allow it, and others would strictly not allow any third-party scripts. Because of this, I never even tried to learn it, and I simply used my item hotkeys via the numpad. Some keyboards don't even have a numpad. How are you going to play Warcraft 3 with hotkeys if you have to move your left keyboard hand all the way over to number 7 and 8 to turn on your health stone and your town portal scroll. You may not even have a numpad key. Yeah, I think Blizzard should be offering that, and that will once again be a loss of skill expression for me, because I can use the numpad and someone else can't. So I have an edge over someone that can't use it because maybe their keyboard doesn't have it, or they think it's too far for their left hand to go there, right? But I still encourage that change. I still welcome it, because I think we also rely on the casual players to be part of a big, vibrant community. And of course, I think it's going to be much more fun and convenient for them to be able to bind their item hotkeys. This is the kind of modern change we should welcome. I feel the same way about the farm allocation, and I still think Age of Empires and Warcraft 3 could have a lot of extra things that could help streamline the game. RTS is a wonderful genre with many different aspects of skill and multitasking and APM and skill expression, and I think it should not become so easy that one gamer will look like he's achieving the exact same thing as another gamer, even though one player is very experienced and the other guy is entirely relying on automation. But I think the gap between that and what we have now is still so far away that I think we can keep looking case-to-case basis whether some changes will actually just be a net positive for the scene. Even if sometimes we will miss the difficulty or the tediousness of some tasks, I think that should be sacrificed at the altar of overall improvement for the scene. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. If you hated this video, please do not hit the subscribe button. See you next time. Bye.